I'm going to miss Arizona, Rube.
Yeah, this is Dave's third trip to Arizona in the last few months. Dave is now a diehard Diamondbacks fan, Phoenix Suns fan. He's got a Steve Nash jersey ready to go for tomorrow.
I have to start paying state income tax out here.
Be voting in the gubernatorial election in November.
It
Dave's
might
all about
happen.
Arizona.
This is the Eagle Eye Podcast. He's Reuben Frank. I'm Dave Zangaro. Another owners' meetings in the books. A lot to talk about in this one. We spoke with Jeff Lurie on Tuesday, also Nick Sirianni early in the morning. A lot of time in between for me, but we figured it out. And some news came out of the Jeff Lurie news that'll make fans very happy. Kelly Green jerseys coming back as an alternate in 2023. This was the plan, but now it's actually happening.
Yeah, and I could tell already from social media, it's making Eagles fans very happy. I personally, my feeling on this. I could not care less about uniforms. They could go out there in purple and orange. I wouldn't even notice. So it's nothing that moves the needle for me, but a lot of people seem really happy about it.
Yeah, and it was, I mean, this has been like a yearly saga at the owners' meetings. I mean, I remember one year chasing Rich McKay down, I think it was it was at Boca. I forget where we were, chasing him down the hallway, asking about the one helmet rule and why it wasn't changing. And it finally changed last year. The Eagles had black helmets. They were working with Nike to try to figure out the color palette because like the Kelly green no longer existed in the new materials they were using. So it took a little while, but Kelly Green's back this year. And Jeff Lurie also told me that they're trying to petition the league to add another alternate helmet for the beginning of this season so they can still keep the black helmet and jersey and the Kelly Green helmet and jersey. We'll see.
Why do people care so much? I mean, they do, and it's great. I just personally, I don't get it. I don't understand it. To me,
Well,
green is green. Who cares?
that's not true.
To me, it
It's
is.
nostalgia. It's like people watch
Yeah, I hate
the.
nostalgia.
Do you?
I hate nostalgia. I hate
Okay.
oldies bands. I hate cover bands. I hate old music. I hate old movies. I like new stuff. I don't like nostalgia.
I don't know if I've ever heard anyone say that.
Just don't. I don't like it. I'm all about the here and now.
Okay. Jesus. All right.
I know for someone who tells like a new Buddy Ryan story every podcast, right?
Yeah. See if we can get that Kotite impression in this pod today. But I think that the newsier stuff from today at the owners' meetings kind of came from Nick Sirianni. Half hour breakfast. They used to be hour long. They're cut in half the last couple of seasons, but I thought there were a lot of good nuggets that came out of Nick in this press conference today.
Yeah, there were, and I think as we get deeper into the off season and kind of separated from the way the season ended, more and more focus is on what next year's team's going to look like. And now that the guys who are going to move on have moved on, and the guys are going to add are here, you kind of have a three-dimensional picture of what the roster is going to look like to some extent. Obviously, there'll be more guys coming in the draft and how he'll sign guys, but I think we have a better sense of what they have. And Nick was pretty open about a few of those players. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I was a little surprised too with some of them. He was asked specifically about Reed Blankenship, who, look, by all accounts, played pretty well last year. Started 4 games, played a bunch of snaps, but it seems like they like him more than I even thought they liked him. If that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like the way he talked about him is like, yeah, pencil him in as a starter. Now things can change. There's still the draft. There's still more waves of free agency. But if they played a game tomorrow, it'd probably be Terrell Edmonds and Reed Blankenship out there.
Yeah, and I mean, on the one hand, there's not a lot of options. Um, Kayvon, you know, but yeah, I think they're really high on him, and I think they should be. He for an undrafted free agent to come and play with that kind of confidence and composure and poise, uh, and make those plays, just around the ball, tough, physical, smart. Uh, he had some blow ups, he had some breakdowns. There was plays he'd like to have back. But for a rookie to play at the consistent level he did, and just kind of marry intelligent play and physical play, it's what you want out of a safety. I guess you want that out of everyone, but especially a safety. It was really impressive, and you know you don't want to get carried away because it was only four starts in 5 games, including the Packers game, when he made some big plays in that game, including picking off Aaron Rodgers. But uh, yeah, I kind of see it the same way they do. I think he's going to be really good. I think we saw enough of him. And look, there's always a chance it was a mirage. There's no question about it when you're talking about expanding a guy's role from a modest role to a hopefully 17 game role. It's you never know exactly how a player is going to respond. It's a completely different animal. But I'm pretty bullish on him, and they are too.
Yeah, it makes sense. I wonder, like, it looks like they're trusting what they saw last year, and I don't know if a lot of teams would do that because you'd think, well, he played well, but like it was a relatively small sample size. This guy was undrafted. We paid him 55 grand in guaranteed money to join the team. They didn't expect this from him clearly. But I also think it was the body of work from really when training camp began
Yeah.
and the pads went on. Like they started to see it. That's what Nick mentioned, and I think that makes sense. And look, you're going to have to cut corners a little bit the way that the roster construction is going. You have to find cheaper players at certain positions. And look, safety and linebacker to an extent and running back are all positions where they're not going to sink a ton of their resources. And I think that makes sense. They're going to kind of punt on some of those positions. You have to, especially when we're talking about a likely quarterback extension.
Yeah, and when the roster has that challenge of having the Jalen contract, a cost-controlled, undrafted rookie free agent contract is manna from heaven. I mean, that is what, as a GM, that's what you want—a kid who can play, who's not making any money. Um, and they could with undrafted players, you can renegotiate their deal after 2 years, where drafted players is 3 years. So maybe he's a starter. If he has a good year next year, at some point they'll do something. They'll figure something out. But
But you're not like forced to though, because you have
no,
those rights for a
yeah,
while.
yeah, you got him. You got his rights for 4 years. So, but I mean, they don't even have the option until another year. So he's cheap, he's good, and that's the kind of player you need if you're going to give Jalen a big bag. That seems to be the phrase this offseason. Big bag.
I mean, you're catching up. It's been a phrase for a while, but I appreciate you.
I'm trying
You're
to keep
catching
up with
up
all
there.
the current slang.
Well, yeah,
I
you
try
love
to
new
be
stuff. We
I'm
already
trying to be dope.
established that. Yeah, yeah. We don't want nostalgic terms. It's not neat. Get rid of that term. What's your read on Blankenship though? Like, what do you think his ceiling is?
Was that intentional?
Yeah,
Okay, that was terrible. Yeah, I think he's. There's nothing to not like. There's nothing like. I think he's fine in coverage. He's a big hitter. He's smart. He works his ass off. We could see that early in training camp. I mean, he was opening eyes right from the get go. Right when the pads went on, they didn't stand very long, but they were on a little bit. So I think he's. I think he's. Uh, you think of like Quentin Michael, who was an undrafted free agent, was a starting safety for several years. Um, I don't know. I mean, I'd hate to limit him and say, solid starter, but I think that's what he is. And if he can be more than that, that's great. But I think he's got the right mentality. He's got the right tools. Look, he's not the fastest guy in the world. That's why he didn't get drafted. Um, a guy like TJ Edwards made himself more athletic just through fitness. Now I don't know if he has the potential to do that with his um, you know build as opposed to TJ, who was kind of a bigger guy who got leaner and faster. So I don't know if that's a possibility, but there's ways you can work on those things. Um, he's not the fastest guy in the world, but I think we saw what he lacked in speed. He made up for in intelligence and instincts, and he gets to the right place because he knows where to go. And I think when you know where to go, you look faster than you are.
yeah. 5 year starter. I mean, I think that's what helps separate himself early when you're looking at just like a crowded room of players. Like that experience showed up and 419 tackles in his career in college. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And yeah, I think he's going to be a starter on this team.
It's funny because with undrafted rookies, you see guys that are talented, but sometimes they don't really belong yet. And Reed never seemed like the moment. Like even he wasn't really playing in the playoffs, and once CJ came back, but he did play a few snaps. But he felt he seemed comfortable in whatever his role was, even when he was starting, whether it was media or practice. In the game, it never seemed like the moment was too big for him. He seemed like he belonged through it all. Like which a lot of undrafted guys, I think it takes them a while to really understand what's at stake and how to act and how to be a professional. These are guys who didn't even. I mean, you get invited to the combine, you get drafted. All of a sudden, you're starting in the NFL, and there's Aaron Rodgers on the other side. So I never saw that from him. He just always kind of acted like he belonged, acted like a professional, and acted like a draft pick.
There's 5 minutes on Reed Blankenship, just like everyone drew up when they said, all right, owners meetings, big news coming out.
I
You
mean,
start with Blankenship and you work your way down.
It's a significant, significant stuff from Nick. And look, like you said, anything can change, but right now he's a starting safety, and we didn't know that yesterday, so that's big.
Yeah, and he was also asked about the running back position. Apparently, every player the Eagles have signed this offseason, Nick wanted to coach them at some point. He kept saying that about a bunch of different guys, but Rashad Penny is one that does make sense. And I think he is excited about Penny, but then he went through the running back room in general, and you're like, I wonder where he's going to cut this off. And he got to Trey Sermon, he started talking about him, and I'm going, if he talks about Brooks Kennedy, we're going to run out of time here. Kennedy Brooks.
Kennedy Brooks,
yeah. Brooks Kennedy is like an accountant.
Who was Trey Sermon's teammate at Oklahoma, along with Grant Calcaterra and Jalen Hurts and CeeDee Lamb. It's pretty good offense. But I was curious as he was going through it. And he said, we'll miss Miles. He didn't say we'll miss his plays. Just said, I'll miss seeing him every day, which was interesting. They don't seem all that broken up about losing Miles.
Well, they were resigned to that, I think.
I think so, yeah. But right now, I mean, look, things can change. They could add a guy, but they seem real happy with those four guys. And Nick, mentioned. Now, look, I don't know how often you can dress four guys, but they like Trey Sermon, and there's a reason he was on the 53 all year. That you're protecting a guy. You don't want anyone to, you put him on the practice squad, you could lose him. So they devoted a year. He learned the system. He learned the scheme, and the scheme might change, but he learned Nick's scheme. He's comfortable around the coaches and the way they train here, the way they lift, the way they practice. It was like a redshirt year. He had the 2 carries. He played 2 games when Boston had the rib injury, and he was in mothballs the rest of the year, and it had to be tough. But here's a 3rd-round pick, 24 years old, who's he had 1 game in San Francisco where he played a lot. He had 19 for 89 against the Seahawks and a touchdown. The one time he had a lot of carries. And it kind of, it's like stealing a 3rd-round pick. And I don't know if he'll be any good, but what do you have to lose? You got a guy who's 24 and was a 3rd-round pick 2 years ago at a position where you just lost a Pro Bowl 1,200-yard rusher. So with Rashad Penny's injury history, I don't know if anybody would be surprised if Trey Sermon has a role in this team.
Yeah, and I think that's fair with Penny because like the upside is great, but given his history and how extensive it is, I don't know if you can build this team and go into a season like really relying on him to stay healthy because at a certain point, like you kind of are what you are, and what they get out of him will be great. Like if he ends up having a big season and he stays healthy, Howie looks like a genius. But we kind of talked about it on the last pod. It's like all these lottery tickets, like he called them. You just don't expect them all to work out, and that's one that if it works out, great. If it doesn't, then I think you're right. Like a guy like Trey Sermon could end up having a role, and I don't know if they're done at the position either.
Yeah, I would guess they're not. We'll see what happens. I mean, they're not going to draft a running back early. I'd be shocked if they do. It's just not Howie's philosophy. But Nick talked about how impressive Sermon was. He said every time, every day of practice, he would do something to get your attention, whether it was run it out on a screenplay. Just he said just seeing him in his pads, just a a cut that he made. He would get your attention, and he was a legitimate prospect coming out of Oklahoma. So I think it tells you something that he brought him up on his own. He wasn't asked what do you if he was asked what do you think of Trey Sermon and he praised him, that's one thing. But he brought him up on his own right after he went in order: Penny, Gainwell, Scott, Sermon. Which there's your depth chart, right?
Yeah, and the note about Shane Steichen really liking Boston and them worried about Shane trying to take him was pretty funny.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, he said. He actually. I listened to that a few times. Nick actually was. He actually like impersonated Shane. Like his voice went into like he talked just like Shane when he was quoting him saying, oh, I like Boston. And it was like, it's like he used his inflections. You know how Shane has that real quick, like, I love Boston Scott. And yeah, so he was worried about losing him. I think Boston's a really valuable guy. It's just, and he made a good point about Boston and his ability to really be productive on limited carries, which has been a hallmark of his career.
And he needs to be that because he's never going to be like the guy, right? He has to make the most of those opportunities.
Unless it's Giants week.
Well, yeah, then you throw out the game plan and just say go kill him again.
It's a group of running backs that it's filled with unknowns. Boston's never. I mean, Gainwell's an unknown. They could be they're really high on him, but I don't know exactly what he is. I mean, the number of big games that he's had in his 2 years, like if you add up his numbers, they're pretty impressive. But he's had like 3 big games. So he's an unknown. Even though I like him, I think he's going to be pretty good. He's an exciting, fun player to watch. He's more physical than I expected he'd be. He's elusive. He's got a little something, but he hasn't done it over week to week to week. Petty's got the injuries. Boston's never been a full-time guy. Trey Sermon has 43 career carries. So there's a question mark about all these guys. What does it add up to? Potentially a really good room, but who knows?
Yeah, and that's kind of the cost cutting measures you have to make. Like you weren't going to bring Miles back on that deal, so you have to pivot and you have to find a way to get that room.
Dave gets paid enough. Every time he says pivot. He gets a stipend in his check.
The other stuff from Sirianni. What'd you make of what he said about Cam Jurgens? He didn't want to call him the leader in the clubhouse for that right guard spot. To me, that's just him realizing there's no benefit to doing that right now. I would have to imagine he is. It wouldn't make sense if he wasn't.
Yeah, it wouldn't. The only other Sue Opeta can start ahead of him. I don't
it's
see
Sue
it.
Time.
Certainly not Jack Driscoll. So I don't know. It's weird that he would be so.
Certainly not. You think certainly not?
I mean, maybe okay. That's. But I mean, there's no like when you draft a guy in the second round, you want him on the field, and
you don't want him to sit out 2 years.
Yeah, maybe he didn't practice that well at guard, and he just want to wait. But I don't believe that. I mean, from everything we heard, he's a natural. I mean, that's what all the guys, that's what Kelsey and they all said. Isaac never said it because he doesn't speak to us, but he would have said it, if he spoke. He spoke to you Super Bowl week, though.
Yeah, for a long time.
Yeah, you had a nice long conversation. It was longer than every other conversation he's had since he got here in 2016. But anyway, why would he be so?
He couldn't leave.
What's that?
He couldn't leave.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was weird. The Sixers game last night. I'm looking at it. They're like the Footprint Center. I'm like, wait a minute. That's where we just were. Media Day was on that court. That's so weird. It's just so weird.
I saw your Amex card on the floor.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd find it, but not to be. But the good thing is the person that found it is spending less than I did. So it's a dumb old joke. But why would he be so effusive about Reed and so reserved about Cam, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't really get that.
Yeah, I don't know if he put that much thought into it.
Maybe. I was thinking maybe because, Reed's like this undrafted guy we discovered. He came out of nowhere. Cam's a second round pick, so I don't know. I really don't know. Cam hasn't played, maybe because Reed has played 4.5 games,
Yeah, and started games last year.
started
Like
games. Yeah, so
Cam
maybe
took
maybe
one
that's it.
one snap at guard.
Yeah, yeah. I think what did he play, like 30 something snaps all year?
Mhm.
Um, I think, but yeah, he's going to be the right guard, barring disaster. And and what he did say was, I mean, which we know is just how much they value versatility in those guys, and that's a Stoutland thing. I mean, if you come in here and just say I'm a guard or I'm a tackle or I'm a center, Stoutland's going to laugh at you and put you to work at whatever position you haven't played, and it makes the player more valuable. Look at Dillard. I mean, well, I don't think Dillard's going to play guard, but I think his value is higher because he can do it.
Sure, yeah. In a way, like you had Cam Jurgens last summer, ended up taking all those center reps with the first team when Kelsey had that elbow surgery, and at the time it was great
Yeah,
because he got all this experience, but then it delayed his cross training until the season. But and that's also tough for us because we haven't seen him get those reps in practice there yet. Whereas like the team has, they've seen him in
right.
practice and walkthroughs, and we haven't gotten to see that yet. It's certainly on the list of like pretty high at the top of the list of things I want to watch in training camp.
Yeah, that's a long list this year. There's a lot of moving pieces, as they say.
I have a couple things here left over from Nick. I want to just run by you. He was asked about Jalen Hurts in this upcoming contract and whether or not he'd use Jalen differently because eventually he's going to be making what, like 50 mil a year. And he said no. And I think that's the right way to do this. Like they're going to pay Jalen because of who he is. What's your read on that? And do you think that there's a case to be made for changing the playing style or changing your usage of Jalen once he becomes paid like a franchise quarterback?
So I had a friend that I worked with up in New Hampshire when I was a teenager, and Andrea, and her sister produced a Broadway play called "I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change." That was the name of the play. And that's what it just reminded me of. Like, you're signing him because of who he is. So why change? Why take away what makes him so dangerous? Now, I do think there will be a day where Jalen can be as effective running 6 to 8 times instead of 14 to 16 times. I think he'd be effective now doing that. But maybe he never will. Maybe he'll just be able to play like this and figure out how to get through seasons healthy. But for now, yeah, there's no reason to change who he is and what he does and what makes him dangerous. I think that change will come organically, I guess, in time. If Jalen, senses that that's the way to go. But I mean, Michael Vick never made that change. He ran as much later in his career as he just didn't know how to slide.
Yeah, he didn't know how to protect himself, and I
He
think
didn't
it's
try.
also
Yeah,
yeah he didn't know how.
yeah,
He couldn't learn it. But with Jalen too, like sometimes his ability to run gets him out of hits too. Like you can get hurt in the pocket, and he has the ability to scramble and avoid pass rushers and break free. I think that's a valuable part of it that doesn't get talked about enough because like yes, he's theoretically opening himself up to some hits downfield when he takes off, but he could be avoiding some in the pocket. And a lot of the hits in the pocket are ones that can force injuries. So
yeah.
I think that's an underrated part of it. And then numbers alone, I think we should do a better job of tracking what kind of rushing attempts they are. Maybe we can do that this year because you look at the number and it's a ton, but like there's different types in there and they're really not all created equally.
Yeah, and I try to, you can remove kneel downs, and I mean, there's certainly a lot of runs that he just doesn't get hit. He's just running out of bounds. So yeah, we'll track that this year. We'll track nature of running plays, and
Yeah,
I'll,
I
I'll
think that
recommend that
makes
to my
sense.
friends at StatHead. maybe they can come up with an analytic for that. But no, it's a fair point. All those keepers are, um, he takes a beating on those. I mean, they're
Sure. No, yeah, absolutely does. Yeah.
they're tough
Uh,
plays.
Next thing, Mariota,
Yeah.
another guy that Nick's always wanted to coach. But he did bring up the connections with Marcus because I think there were some questions about the way things ended with Mariota in Atlanta. He was a starter and then he wasn't a starter, and it seemed like a weird relationship. But Nick said they leaned on the guys that already knew him in the building: Alex Tanney, his former teammate, Jason Michael, his former offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. So they have people in the building that know him about as well as anyone else.
Chip. Is Chip still with the team? No, Chip's not here anymore. Um, uh, yeah, yeah, and I think that stuff's so important to Nick. That I mean, he's always talking about connections, and I'm sure there are other people that he called about him. Um, I certainly, yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Um, yeah, I thought, and Nick made the point that we didn't get him because he can do some of the same things as Jalen, but you know what? Two quarterbacks ran the most RPO plays all year last year was Jalen and Mariota. So
It
it's
makes sense.
it's something he's comfortable doing. Um, I don't think you have to have a quarterback that's similar, but it makes it easier, all things being equal.
It does. I do wonder though, like if Mariota's in there because Jalen's hurt, Mariota has a pretty extensive injury history too. I think you might want to be careful there because then you're staring down an Ian Book appearance.
Alex Tanney have any eligibility left?
I don't believe so. I don't think he would have anything left in him.
Okay. Yeah. By the way, you're not allowed to have player coaches in the NFL.
Yeah, the Eagles found that out.
Yeah, that's right. With Matt Nagy, right? Was it? Who
I
was
think
it?
it. I think it was Nagy. Yeah, I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, he was still under
Like
contract.
2008 or something.
Yeah, was it Matt Nagy? Who was it? I have to look that up. Yeah, he was still under contract for some other league or something that had folded, but he was still under contract and he couldn't play. He couldn't. Anyway, um, but yeah, if you could have player coaches, it'd be really easy to circumvent the salary cap. Well, we're paying him as a coach, but he's playing for us. But anyway, um, yeah, I mean, I guess that's a concern. Jalen's missed 3 games in 2 years, and so he's been he's been. I don't know. I don't see him as a huge injury risk, I guess.
Yeah, I see that side of it, but I also see he's been hurt in back-to-back Decembers.
Yeah,
It's something to think about, and it's the
it is.
reason why they're investing in the backup quarterback position in the first place.
Yeah, and I like Minshew, but I kind of feel better with Mariota. I'm not sure why. I mean, Minshew's career numbers are actually a little better.
Yeah, Mariota has like thrown picks. He's had some negative plays,
Yeah,
which is generally something you don't want in your backup, but he does have a ton of experience. And I really do think the stylistic similarities matter.
I do too. Yeah, I think that's big.
I have one
And
other
he's
note.
also he's an older guy. Like I think Minshew still like has that. He wants to be a starter, and I'm sure Mariota does as well. But I mean, he's what in his 8th year now, 9th year,
Yeah.
9th year, right? Um, it's a little different when you've been that guy. You've started games. Um, I think maybe there's a little less sense of I got to get my shot. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it just probably depends on the player. I don't know if it's a
Probably. Yeah,
yeah.
maybe.
My last note from Sirianni was I asked him about Sean Desai and what he's learned about him and what he's learned specifically about the player profile Desai wants. And this is something we already pretty much knew, but he confirmed it again that the player profile really isn't changing. There's going to be a lot of similarities to what Jonathan Gannon did and what Jonathan Gannon wanted to what Sean Desai wants to do and what he wants in his players. So we talked about this when they were going through the process and they chose Desai that it was an outside hire, but it was in line with what they were already doing in large part.
Yeah, and I think people make the mistake of thinking that since Nick is an offensive coach, he doesn't have a clear vision for what he wants on defense, and that might be true for some coaches, some offensive
Mm-hmm.
coaches, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think there's
We
some
saw
defense
Doug. I mean, how much autonomy did Jim Schwartz have?
unlimited.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and so it's just it differs by coach. I mean, and that doesn't surprise you, knowing Doug. I mean, Doug was all about play calling, and Nick is more CEO of the team. That's why he's not play calling. It's his, he's more of a, I don't know, holistic view of the team. Whatever the hell that means, I don't know. But yeah, he has a clear vision of how he wants defense to be played, and um, that's
He's
why
vocal about it too. He mentions it a lot. Like,
he does.
I have ideas, and I want it's my defense too.
Yeah,
And I think that's different than some of the other coaches we've seen.
yeah. There's no question, and there's no right or wrong. It's a personal choice, and but it puts more on the coordinator. It puts more on the coordinator if you have like a Jim Johnson who it's just this is his defense, or Jim Schwartz. Um, so, but it's I mean Sean Desai's got got to match his what he wants to do with what Nick wants. Um, so he'll do that, and the defense will look a lot like last year's. Not exactly, not identically, but similar.
I lied to you. I have one more thing from Sirianni.
I do too. What do you got?
Okay, well, I asked him about the Super Bowl hangover and uh, how they kind of get over this emotional loss and the journey to get there. Uh, and I appreciated his answer because he's talking about the process and as cliche as it is, going one step at a time. It's daunting though. It's. I said it's like kind of you climb a mountain, you're almost at the top, and then you slide all the way back down. You got to do it again, and now you're looking up at this mountain like, man, you want to just skip steps, but you can't do that. You can't skip steps. You have to go through the whole process again. And it has to be frustrating, but they have to kind of embrace what that process is.
Yeah, it used to happen to me in Frogger. Like, you're jumping across the thing and you're almost there and you just don't make that last jump. You got to go all the way back to the start jumping. It's the exact same thing. But and I think that's one of the reasons teams that lose in the Super Bowl don't get back to the Super Bowl historically. Some do, not many. Um, I just think it's so hard to reset, and maybe because this team has changed so much, it'll be a little different. I don't know, but look, the bulk of the team that just played in Phoenix is still here, so it'll be interesting to see how they respond. It's not an easy thing to do, and I think the mental part of it. I think there's a physical part too because your season's going so late, and you just don't have as much recovery time. I mean, OTAs are just a few weeks away and all that, but um,
All the guys who need surgery, now you're doing it in late February instead of in
right,
January if the season ended
right.
after the regular season.
But I think the mental part of it is really really tough to lose that game, especially when look, there was quite a while where it looked like they were going to win that football game, and just to deal with that crushing disappointment, and now all of a sudden you're back at square one. You don't have any wins now. You're not 8-0 or 10-1. You're 0-0. You're tied with everyone else, um, and you got to start over. And I think that can be really daunting. I think Nick is really good at um, keeping guys focused on today and the next rep, the next play, but it's hard.
What was your other note from Sirianni?
He spoke highly of Quez and said, look, I don't know what's going to happen. Quez might not be here, but he is under contract, so he probably will be. Look, it was a really tough year for him, and he just said, he still has confidence in him. He mentioned he really liked how he was accountable after the season, which he was. He took a lot of questions on locker cleanout day, a day when a lot of guys avoided the media. A lot of guys. Quez stood his locker until every question had been asked probably 5 times. I give him credit for that. Look, that doesn't mean he's going to bounce back, but it does mean he's accepting the blame and the responsibility, and he understands that he's got to be better, and he wants to put in the work to do that. And he's got a trait that very few guys have that every team wants. We've seen him make big plays in the past, and I think he's going to get that opportunity. And Nick seems to be. Look, my initial reaction after the Super Bowl is you got to cut this guy, and we talked about that. You can't look. This team lost 4 games, and he had a big role in 3 of those losses. I mean, that's awful, but that's not the answer. The answer is to have him go to work and try to bounce back. And that's what it
Yeah,
sounds like Nick's going to give him the chance to do.
yeah. I always love when you come around.
You know, yeah, never mind. I was going to tell a one eye story, but I won't.
All right, catch all the sports action and more at Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Whether it's the money line or the pass line, there's something for everyone in a great sports book. Rivers Casino Philadelphia. Philly loves a winner. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Jeff Lurie, talk to him for the first time in a few weeks, which is rare.
Yeah.
Normally, there's so many things that have piled up by the owners' meetings. I mean, last year we had a ton of questions for Jeffrey at the owners' meetings. This year, not as much. We talked to him at the Super Bowl, but I thought there were some things that were intriguing and are worth talking about.
Yeah. And now we might not talk to him now for quite a while. He doesn't do his training camp. He does sometimes, maybe every 3 years. We'll be standing there at practice and somebody will come, oh, Jeff's going to talk after practice. But that doesn't happen. Used to happen every year.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't happen much anymore. So we might not talk to him again until they hire the new coach. No,
like next year. I mean, at this event next year, possibly.
it could be. That very well could be, which is, it's unfortunate because, he's um, it takes some, it's kind of like, forging through how they have those rail trails, like they take over old railroad tracks that haven't been used in like 50 years. They turn them into trails. So my friend worked on it. Like they had to forge through the weeds just to try to clear them out to set that up. And that's what sometimes going through Jeffrey's press conferences, like there's like a lot of words there and you got to forge through the weeds to really get the insight, but it's in there somewhere. Just like
and it's funny too because you were listening to it on a video stream, and I'm in the room, and I think it's a different experience. I think
probably is.
Yeah, I think he's able to get his point across better in person.
Maybe. What stood out to you today?
Honestly, it was the answer to my question, and maybe that's just because I was paying more attention to it. But I find it fascinating that Nick Sirianni puts this much effort into his coaching staff. And it's such a juxtaposition from Doug Peterson. We've talked about this before, but I mean, a big part of Doug's undoing and a big part of the reason they fired him was because Jeffrey didn't agree with his decisions and the way he was going with that coaching staff. So to see Nick Sirianni this offseason have to replace coordinators, have to replace a few position coaches, and to see the process he's gone through, it's exactly what Jeff Lurie wants.
Yeah, and it's the polar opposite of Doug. Doug, I mean, that's why Doug kept 9 of Chip's coaches. It was just easier than hiring his own. That's just something that never, really resonated with him, which is, every coach has things they like to do and don't like to do. And that was one thing he just wasn't really invested in. And it was part of his undoing here just because I think Jeff Lurie values it so much. But yeah, he talked about how he interviewed, 12 linebacker coach candidates, and there were long interviews. He's really thorough about that stuff, and that's how you find coaches from outside. It's the easy thing is just to promote, and maybe sometimes, you lose good coaches if you don't do that, but. You also find guys that maybe.
Yeah, and even though Brian Johnson was an internal promotion, he didn't know Brian Johnson before he hired him. So in a way, it's almost different. And Jeffrey brought it up, saying like I forget the terms he used, but basically like you hire your buddies, it's not always the right move. And I don't know if that's necessarily what Doug wanted to do, but like promoting Press Taylor and promoting Matt Burke because they were already in the building just wasn't the process Jeffrey wanted the head coach to go with. And Nick thinks about it, I think, more in line with what he wants.
Yeah, and it's funny because Doug, you think of Doug as an Andy Reid product, and nobody was more thorough looking for coaches than Andy. I mean, Andy's original staff here in '99, he didn't know one guy on that staff. He didn't know any of them. They were just, he had these notebooks. He's like, oh, I like the way those linebackers played. Who's their coach? I like the way this guy kept. And he said he never met any of them. He never met Jim Johnson before. So Doug, who played under Andy here, coached under him here, and coached under him in Kansas City, had a completely different philosophy than Andy did, and Nick has a completely different one than Doug.
Yeah. How about you? What stood out most from Jeffrey's availability?
He's about to give this contract out worth $500 million or whatever it's going to be, and there's like no sign of him like having any trepidation at all. He's like so positive about this deal, and Jalen as a person, as a player. It's kind of cool, because it's a lot of money they're about to invest in him, and especially the way it went with the last quarterback who he mentioned by name, which was really odd hearing him say Carson Wentz's name. Probably as odd as it was hearing us say it the first time after. It worked out with Donovan. You're like, wow, he was the owner when Donovan got that contract, huge contract. This deal. There's no reluctance, reticence, despite what happened with Carson. And he referenced all the injuries he had. He was being very gracious there. But it's cool that he's just so positive and so effusive in his praise for him. He's about to give out all this money.
He called him the most mature 24-year-old he's ever met. Julian Lurie caught a little stray.
Yeah.
Because he was I think Julian's mature, but not like that.
Yeah, he's more mature than the guy who's about to own the team, which is a little scary. Jalen will probably own it one day, so who knows? But the other thing that kind of stood out was it's kind of similar to what you said about Nick and his search process, just Howie and his ability to recognize talent, bring in talent, develop talent, and front office type talent, and just how much that's paid off. He also, one other thing he said that was interesting. He talked about how proud.
Hold on, can I hit on that real quickly though?
Yeah, sure.
I found it interesting. He said that Howie was in front of all the owners talking about their process and how they don't have just like one role for people in the building. Like, you're not just in charge of scouting, you're understanding how everything works, and that's what made them really successful, and it's what's allowed them to develop all these people who they think, some who have become GMs and some who probably will. As he's saying all this, I'm starting to think, why are you letting Howie tell everyone this?
Yeah.
Like, if you figured it out, don't tell everyone.
Yeah, that's interesting.
For a franchise that always like trumpets competitive advantage, I thought it was kind of strange.
Nick won't even tell us who like the backup right guard is, and here's Howie giving away these secrets. That's
a few red herrings in there.
Yeah, could be a little what's the word? Trojan front office. But yeah, no, that's a fair question. But I do. I mean, that's something Jeffrey's always. That's a culture he's always. Cross-training executives, and it's kind of like his son. He's, his son is learning every department. And I think I don't know if everybody's going that extreme, but what do they call it when people spend a week in a different job in the same company? I really like that idea.
It's like a rotation. I don't know if there's a word.
It's like a corporate buzzword for it. Like, a lot of companies will have people just switch jobs, like maybe you would go cover the Sixers for a week, or I'd work on the copy desk, whatever it is, just to kind of get a bigger feel for the whole company and how how everything operates. Maybe we could work in sales for a week, whatever. I like that, and I think that's something Jeffrey's always subscribed to.
Yeah, I think that's fair. He also confirmed the Adam Berry hire. From Goldman Sachs, Andrew Berry's brother, twin. And he said he thinks he's a future GM in the league. Add another one to the list.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Kind of an unusual journey to But I guess if you're day trading stocks, you can day trade players, right?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of crossover in the skills.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure there is. What's that scene in Back to the Future when he's like, "No, your brother." He calls Chuck Berry during the guitar scene. Like
Oh,
your
I don't know. I only like new movies, so I don't.
brother. Adam Berry. This is your brother, your cousin, Adam Berry. He's calling Chuck Berry. That's what Andrew Berry's brother just reminded me of that scene. Man, you're sarcastic today. I like it.
I'm
Um,
tired. I've been here all day.
Dave's been at the hotel since like 6 this morning. Um, yeah. Anything else? I'm just trying to think anything else
You
from.
were about to say something else before I wanted to hit the internal.
Oh, I know what it was. He talked about. Gosh, I think it was him. I don't think it was Nick about just developing young players. Just that the whole notion
Mhm.
of and we know they have extra periods for the practice squad guys and the guys that don't the development periods, but um, when you have a quarterback who's about to get this contract, that's a big part of building a roster is developing young players and spending the time with them. It's not just this guy's no good, this guy's good. It's like, all right, this guy needs work on these things. And I think that's one of the reasons you see guys on the practice squad for multiple years. They see something in that guy. There's potential, um, and they're not ready to play yet, but there's enough potential there to keep them around and keep them in the program and keep them, with this coaching staff, and maybe they'll develop into something. And when your roster has to be inexpensive, you got to develop those guys. Oh, that was
Yeah, I
it.
think it's important all the time, but especially now where you're like now it's necessary, and
Yeah,
that's why it helps to already have that plan in place because now when you do need it, it's there, and you're able to find a Reed Blankenship or whoever else to supplement a roster with a quarterback who's got that percentage of the cap.
yeah, absolutely.
You got anything else here?
No, no, that's a lot to unpack. It was a good day. It was a good couple days, and we won't be hearing from these guys till I guess we'll talk to Howie just before the draft.
The draft, Howie and Nick Sirianni before the draft.
Yeah, do we get Nick too? We
Hmm.
get Nick before the draft, and then
Yeah,
we'll talk to those guys each day of the draft, um, which isn't that far off,
I got to pet a llama last night.
really.
Yeah, they had a like a little like not a petting zoo. It's supposed to be like goat yoga at the resort at the party, but they had little goats and they had llamas, and I got to go play with the little goats and llamas.
Well, glad you had something to play with while you're out there.
Yeah, it was fun. It was the only time I wasn't working, but it was a good time.
Well, you got a history with goats.
Oh, that's true. The Nick Foles story. You can go find
Always
that
the goat.
somewhere. All right, let's wrap this up. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye podcast, please rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click the like button and subscribe there as well. We'll talk to you in a little bit. For Rube, I'm Dave. This has been Eagle Eye.